Good evening, and welcome to the fourth annual Nellie Bly Award for Investigative Reporting. I'm Bruce Roeder, president and founder of the Museum of Political Corruption and its Center for Ethical Governance. I'm delighted you could join us this evening as we celebrate Jane Mayer as this year's winner of the Nellie Bly Award. We have a wonderful program in store, a fitting tribute to Jane Mayer, to the profession of journalism, and of course to Nellie Bly, the fearless 19th century reporter for whom this award is named. While Nellie Bly is best known for her reporting on the deplorable conditions at the insane asylum on Blackwell's Island, our award was inspired by her trip to Albany in 1888. Bly had heard one could bribe the New York legislature to pass or kill any bill, so posing as a lobbyist, she put this to the test. She was able to have a bill killed for the sum of $1,250. Perhaps the New York State legislature costs a little more these days. Of course, rather than pay the bribe, Bly returned to her paper to write about her experience. Highlighting inspirational and empowering individuals like Nellie Bly and Jane Mayer is one way we believe we can make corruption history. Naturally, we cannot do this alone. We thrive on your ideas and your enthusiasm, so please sign up for our mailing list, send us your suggestions, and of course, your donations are greatly appreciated. Whether under the table or over, large bills or small unmarked ones, your support helps us to serve the public. So please consider a donation by visiting our website at www.museumofpoliticalcorruption.org. Now, before I turn the program over to our distinguished MC, Joe Donahue, please enjoy this brief video.
The Museum of Political Corruption and its Center for Ethical Governance, a nonprofit, nonpartisan institution, is committed to educating the public and encouraging solutions that promote ethics reform and good governance. Since its founding in 2015, the museum has offered innovative and engaging programming, from pop-up exhibits and round-table discussions to film screenings and a historical walking tour of downtown Albany. The museum has promoted civics in the classroom, worked with international delegations, and curated a collection of quotes on ethical leadership from some of our most esteemed public figures. Today, we are creating a virtual museum which will offer visitors an engaging and interactive experience and serve as a bridge towards a state-of-the-art cultural and educational facility. Our museum's work can only be sustained with your help. Please share your ideas, your visions for a more ethical future, and your financial support. All of these are essential and greatly appreciated. Our annual Nellie Bly Award, named for the intrepid 19th century reporter who helped pioneer the field of investigative journalism, honors the courageous and essential work of today's investigative reporters. Previous winners have included Suzanne Craig, Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey, and Jim Haney. Tonight, we are delighted to present the fourth annual Nellie Bly Award for investigative reporting to Jane Mayer. Perhaps coincidentally, Mayer's own family legacy overlaps with Nellie Bly's legendary career. Mayer's grandfather, the historian Alan Nevins, worked as a young man at Bly's newspaper, the New York World. Her great-grandmother, Anna Steese Richardson, editor of Woman's Home Companion, was, like Bly, a pioneering female journalist in New York City. Jane Mayer has proven herself to be a pioneer as well. In 1982, she joined the Wall Street Journal, where she became the first woman there to be named White House correspondent. She served as a war and foreign correspondent, where she reported on the bombing of the American barracks in Beirut and the Persian Gulf War. In 1995, Mayer joined The New Yorker, where she is the chief Washington correspondent and writes about politics, law, and national security. Jane's indefatigable quest for the truth and her determination to inform the public is why we celebrate her this evening. Together, we wish her congratulations.
Jane, congratulations on the award.
Jane, congratulations on your award. We're so proud of you, always.
I think Nellie Bly would be a huge fan of yours if she were alive today.
Congratulations, Jane Mayer. Jane, congratulations on this amazing award, and thank you for decades of nonstop ferocious reporting.
Hi, Jane. Congratulations.
Congratulations, Jane.
I have such incredible admiration for your unbelievable research in journalism.
You and I have known each other for a quarter century at least. I'm a great admirer.
Your reporting that documented the money behind the rise of the radical right exposed the most dangerous threat to our democracy.
As Jane's editor, allow me to thank her for hundreds of phone conversations that feature her favorite phrase, "I just heard something."
There is no one more deserving and no colleague more fun or more gracious. Thanks for all you do.
I'm really happy for you. Can't wait for your next story, and well done.
This is more than well deserved, and congratulations.
My congratulations to all.
A fitting tribute to Jane from those who know her well. Let me give a tremendous thanks to documentary filmmaker and museum trustee Veronica Medina Metzner for creating our videos this evening, with wonderful assistance from our trustee Scott Osborne. In the spirit of gratitude, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge all our distinguished board members who have helped make this museum and our programming possible. I'd like to especially thank those who served on this year's Nellie Bly Award Selection Committee: Carol Kamen, Chair, Frank Anacarico, Phil Plutch, Maeve Tuer, Susan Weber, Susan Arbetter, and Rick Smith. And let me take this opportunity to give a special thanks to Ken Ackerman for his generous support for the Nellie Bly Award. At this time, I'm delighted to turn the program over to a man who needs little introduction, since his commanding and eloquent voice has graced the Capital District's airwaves for over 2 decades, the Senior Director of News and Programming at WAMC Radio, Joe Donahue.
There we go. How are you? Thank you very much, Bruce. Greetings to our audience. Let me begin with one small public service announcement to our viewers. I suggest putting your screens on speaker view, and you'll find that option in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. That way, whoever is talking will appear as a larger box on your monitor. Also, if you have any questions, we have a few, but if you have any, please send them to Bruce using the chat feature. It's right on the bottom of your screen, probably, and we'll be fielding them for the Q&A section of the program. Now, it is my distinct honor to introduce the just amazing and wonderful Jane Mayer. It is impossible to go through all of her accolades. She is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right and the Dark Side, the inside story of how the war on terror turned into a war on American ideals. Among her many awards, Jane Mayer is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, the George Polk Award for magazine reporting, the James Aronson Award for social justice journalism, the Francis Perkins Prize for courage, and now the Nellie Bly Award for investigative reporting. Jane Mayer, great pleasure to speak to you again. Thank you very much for being here, for being with us, and congratulations on this beautiful honor.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Bruce, and everybody who gave me this wonderful award and put together that video that put me in with so many of my heroes. I really was very touched. Thank you so much. That was great. Even my editor, a couple of them there. So thank you so much. It was great, and it's a real honor, and it's a pleasure. You know, it's kind of a lucky thing to be able to be honored for something that I've had so much fun doing and feel so good about doing. So I feel like I've had a very lucky career, and I'm feeling like it better not be over yet, because we sure need reporters at this moment.
Oh God, do we? So let's just ask before we get into your career and about what we're facing here. What's the last week been like for you?
I'm actually, right up till about an hour ago, struggling to get a story out that has a lot of legal complications. I hope it will hit soon. I probably shouldn't say too much more, but I'm trying to get it out so that in such a way that we don't get sued for libel and I don't have to go to court. I would really like to get it out there so the public can learn even more about the people that are running, in this case, the Trump campaign. So
is the that's a hell of a tease, by the way, Jay. Good for you. So the question, the question I have is: so is it about the campaign, or is it about what we have been going through over the last week in the jockeying of trying to fill the court slot?
Well, I was actually, this particular story is more sort of campaign oriented, but before that I was, let's see, last weekend I was writing about RBG and the politics of what might happen on the Hill in terms of filling that position, the vacancy. And I had done a long profile of Mitch McConnell, which ran this last April.
Right.
So I felt, drawn to trying to write something to explain how he would likely approach this. It's not the kind of, it's deadline reporting. I wrote it for the web, but it felt like something. If I could bring some of what I know about Mitch McConnell to our readers, I was trying to do that. And so, I mean, and basically what I was trying to say, and I did some actual reporting. It wasn't just off the top of my head. I called a number of people who know him, and who followed his career closely. And the gist that I was hearing was, yes, of course, this is a crowning glory for him to try to put yet another conservative justice on the Supreme Court, but he's going to have to handle it in such a way that it doesn't get in the way of his other major preoccupation, which is what he's always cared about most, which is holding the majority in the Senate, staying majority leader, keeping the power, and keeping the power in his own hands in this particular case. And among the things that I thought was interesting is that, this is that even if you look back in 2016, Mitch McConnell didn't think Trump was going to win, and he also disparaged Trump behind his back. And he was quite looking forward to being the single most important Republican in the country. And so we think that all he cares about, or the way he'd been written about a lot, was about, this is all about the court, but it's also about Mitch McConnell. He wants to hold on to that Republican majority, and it's not a guaranteed thing right now, because there are a handful of cases of candidates that races that are very, very tight. And so the way he approaches this is going to be some way that he thinks is not going to hurt his chances of getting his own members in his caucus reelected. So I was writing about that kind of political calculation. He loves political calculations. So.
One of the things in that piece is that he has been, I mean, it wasn't a secret, but he was talking about this earlier this year of just sort of waiting for Justice Ginsburg to pass and saying, we're ready. If it happens October 15th, we're ready.
Yeah, as I reported back in April, he was going to fundraisers. This was according to someone who had been in the Trump White House, who told me that McConnell was going to talk to the big donors, and to cheer them up, he would say, if RBG meets her reward, we're going to have our October surprise. And it's going to be putting someone on the court. And so he's almost, I mean, it was unseemly. He was dangling this as something that donors could look forward to.
So here we are in an event for the Museum of Political Corruption. So let me ask this question while we're talking about Mitch McConnell. Talk about the intersection of political corruption and moral corruption.
Whoa. Well, what can I say? At the end of the day, I mean, what has been my own preoccupation really since coming to Washington, I'm a New Yorker, and I went through my entire, almost my entire, early education from about kindergarten through 11th grade, I went to something called the Ethical Culture School. So my preoccupation has been ethics in many ways, and how people in power make decisions, and whether or not, you know, when they do right and when they do wrong, how do they, what's motivating them? Why are they doing those, making those decisions the way they are? And, you know, government is just the arena in which moral decisions play out, as far as I'm concerned. That there's always, almost always, a moral dimension to it. And you know, so it's been very much what I've been thinking about since the time I came to Washington. I didn't realize it for a while, but then I began to see that there's sort of a pattern in what I'm writing, which is about how people handle power and whether they do the right thing, and what's going through their mind and how they justify it when they don't.
So what we're seeing right now, and what we've really been seeing from this administration over the past 4 years, 3.5 years, how do you process that, and how did you begin to process that as an investigative journalist, of saying, okay, this is what we're up against, this is what we have to look at, and when you started to get a clear understanding of how of what the machinations were in the White House, much like what you were talking about with Mitch McConnell, of what is going on there, of who ultimately is behind what is happening day to day?
Well, I mean, I kind of got a foretaste of what Trump might be, because one of the stories I did before he was elected was the first story in which Tony Schwartz, who was the co-author and the person who really wrote The Art of the Deal for Trump, sat down with me and told me what he'd really seen of Trump. And he was one of the few people I felt who really had an inside, you know, inner ring view in on Trump over a long period of time. It was about a year, I guess, that he sat at his elbow and watched him operate. And what Tony Schwartz said to me was pretty unbelievable. I mean, I remember at one point he sent me an email after I'd been interviewing him, and he said, you know, if Donald Trump is elected president, I fear for the future of civilization. And I remember sending him back an email saying, is that on the record? Can I use that? And sticking it into the thing. But his descriptions of how Trump's mind worked, which were basically what he said was that Trump, unlike almost anyone else he'd ever met, had no compunction about lying, and didn't feel that it was even, it was just instrumental to him. There was no moral barrier there. He said that, and the other thing that he said that was so interesting was that this gave Trump extra power. It was kind of a superpower, because almost everybody else stopped short of doing the wrong thing because we know it's the wrong thing, but that he actually was kind of immune to those breaks. And so by just pushing it further than anyone else would go, everybody would look at him. He's sort of a narcissist and would keep all eyes on him. And he would do these things that were beyond the pale and beyond the norms, and explode the norms. And it was a warning to early on. And I remember the other thing that I learned about Trump from that piece was that I interviewed Trump for it, and got him on the phone. And it wasn't very hard back then to do. This was before he was elected president. In fact, what I've discovered was it was hard to get him off the phone. He wanted to talk and talk and talk. But anyway, I told him that that I didn't think that Tony Schwartz was going to be voting for him. And he said, he first had been praising Tony Schwartz, and then when he heard that, he said, is that right? And then he said, that is so disloyal. And he got this really dark sound in his voice, and he said, he probably thinks it's good for him, but he's going to find out it's not good for him. And then I got off the phone with him, and about 10 minutes later, my phone rang. And it was Tony Schwartz. And he said, Jane, did you tell Donald Trump that I'm not voting for him? And I said, yeah, well, it's true, right? And Tony Schwartz said, well, he just called me. He tracked me down on my car phone, in my car. It's the first time I've heard from him in whatever it was, like 29 years or something like that, and reamed him out. And after Trump had said to me, I love the New Yorker. It's great publication. It's just fantastic. And then he said, and Tony Schwartz said to me, and as Trump got off the phone with him, he said, and some woman from the New Yorker called, failing publication that nobody reads. And so I felt sort of forewarned about like Trump's, how he operates from all of this. But I did also see when he was on the phone, I have to say, he had a certain amount of charm. It was interesting. It was right around the time when he was picking his vice president, who was going to be, his choice to run with him on the ticket. And he was kind of tossing out names to me and asking me what I thought of them. And, which is something he really likes to do anyway. You sort of, canvass the room, and it's sort of playing with people and their reputations. And anyway, he was not, he had a certain amount of worrisome charm that went with that killer instinct. And Tony Schwartz said he would do, pretty much anything. Didn't read, didn't have any interest in government. His only interest, Tony Schwartz said, is in himself. And the people who back him are going to find that out. So I feel like that piece really captured a lot. I'm not sure anyone paid any attention. I mean, it got something like 5 million hits, I remember, clicks, but that's a small number of people in this country.
First of all, great impression of him. That's really good. I like that a lot. Also, a fear of the future of our civilization. I mean, that is. Can you give us any good reason why we shouldn't still have that fear now?
Well, I can't say that I'm, feeling unalloyed optimism right this moment, but to some extent, I have felt that civil society in our country has done a pretty good job in holding its own compared with many other countries. What I worry about is that we will fall as other democracies have, or become captured by corrupt oligarchical interests who will capture the government and just completely sell out the public interest. And I think this has been a battle for 4 years, and it's not just one-sided. And you have seen the press has done some of the best reporting I've ever seen. Reporters have been tireless and brave. This is good, and I think. I see a lot of civic groups taking action. We saw in 2018 a lot of voters coming out and pushing back. So I wouldn't say that it's a hopeless situation. I've been glad to see that civil society in this country has pushed back. I'm most worried in a way right now by both the voting situation, but in terms of what's happening in the government, for me, I think in some ways the scariest things going on are, it's hard to say because there's so many things going on, but one of the scariest things is what's happening at the Justice Department. Because I've often felt that when I wrote about, for instance, the Koch brothers in Dark Money, that the thing that has held them back and made us different from places like Russia is that we have the rule of law and a very strong Justice Department, strong and uncorrupted courts, and a Justice Department that's independent of politics. And so when I see what's going on there now, I think that's one of the most important battles. And I'm very worried about that. And so, I mean, there are plenty of other things to be worried about too, but that's one of the ones that when I think about the big picture here, I'm most concerned about. So.
Well, so we have 40 days, 40 whatever days it is, to the election, and so I would assume that you will join the chorus of people who believe that this is not going to be something that we're going to know on the night of the election, who won, and that it will end at that point. It's going to be something that's going to grind on for a long time, and that's only because the president keeps telling us that.
I mean, I don't know if that's true. I mean, it depends. If there's a landslide, either direction, it will be decided. I mean, I think what people, at least what I've read is a concern is what people are calling the Red Mirage, which is sort of red states coming in with earlier returns because they have fewer, vote by mail, less voting by mail, and so you may get an early return that has to be, reconsidered afterwards. And that's going to be the most dangerous period if that takes place, I think. So I covered the 2000 election, and actually at the time it was almost by, almost by luck, I had decided to do a feature on President Bush's nephew, who was working at Fox and was going to call the election. And he was just running Fox's election night coverage, but none of us knew in advance when I decided to do this feature that it was going to turn out to be a call that was going to potentially change history. And anyway, it ended up being a gigantic disaster for the nephew, who called it early and then was accused of having done it to favor his uncle. I don't think that's really what happened, but all I'm saying is I have lived through one of these elections where every call, everything that reporters say, every step of the way is just fraught. And I fear that we're going to go through this again, and we're not ready for it. And I'm afraid that it's almost hard to know how to get ready for it.
Well, that was I was just going to ask you, which is a two-part question. One is, do you believe that there were essential lessons learned in the coverage of the 2016 campaign? And then how that will influence and maybe in some cases it has already influenced the coverage of this campaign.
I mean, I think the lesson is don't call it until the networks and reporters have got to try to play a civic role, which is to calm people and to be careful, very careful, and not let anybody pre-call it before the returns are really known, because that's incredibly prejudicial, as we've seen. So we've got to be careful, and I think the networks learned a lot from that lesson. I mean, politically, the other lesson everybody learned was Florida. So eyes are on Florida here, and we all have seen, the fight over whether or not felons are going to be able to vote. So as one of the things that's one of the things that could matter. Anyway, I think for me, the important thing is to try to be really careful, and which is the opposite, really, of what social media does. I mean, right. we're unfortunately in a situation now in this world where being split second fast is at such a premium, and being a dinosaur, like somebody who works for the New Yorker and trying to be really careful is not necessarily valued by, or at least it doesn't dominate the conversation. So we're going to try. I think people are going to try to be careful. I hope so.
Well, certainly valued. I do wonder. Here we are. We're going through this election cycle during a global pandemic, and the campaign and the president seem to just be ignoring it, basically. And I'm curious as to how that frames things for you, and what it has been like to cover this administration, cover these stories as we've gone through the last several months during this pandemic.
Thanks for asking, because I don't know how many people have really thought that much about it. And but the truth is that being a reporter, and maybe there are many others who've tuned in here and are reporters too, but it's hard not to be able to actually go talk to people face to face.
Yeah.
And travel and see things. You can do a certain amount of surface reporting being on the phone, but as far as I'm concerned, there's no substitute for actually going to see people and spending time with them, and seeing and hearing them and watching their expressions and being in the room with them and really being able to sound them out. There's a lot I feel there's a lot missing as a reporter, and I'm going crazy not being able to get out of my house. So, reporters are people with wanderlust to a certain extent. I did go to Delaware and to the Eastern Shore. I wanted to see how the so-called essential workers who were working in the meat plants, and in this particular case in the poultry plants, were faring after the president had commanded that they had to keep working because they were essential. And the outbreaks of COVID-19 were terrible in these places. And I just didn't think I could do this from my desk, and Delaware's not that far. So I put on I got a really good mask and one of those face shields, and drove out there and really did manage to talk to some people. I met somebody at a truck stop, and we pulled up side by side in our cars 6 feet apart. And I gave her my phone so she could talk into the tape recorder on it, and interviewed her that way as I shouted questions out from my car to her car. And it turned out to be a remarkable interview, and for me anyway, very moving to hear what these people are going through at the bottom of our society, who are being forced to work in it's a choice between giving up on getting a paycheck or facing the possibility of a deadly disease every day. And they're already in dire straits. They're not being paid enough anyway. So I was glad to get out and do that kind of reporting, but I feel very stymied, and I bet you most reporters do.
Absolutely. What sense I want to ask this question, and then we'll go to, I know we have a lot of questions from people who are with us this evening, but let me ask you as to what role and how much of an impact do you think the pandemic and the administration's response is going to have on the election, and how much of it's going to be in the forefront over the next few weeks, especially as, and I will admit I obsess about this, as I know so many of us in the media do, but you watch the numbers every day, and we're starting to see them go up ever so slightly, and it's you just have to wonder what impact that could have or will have.
Well, I think it's got to have a negative impact on President Trump's standing. He is the president during this period, and a lot of his support came from older voters. And older voters are concerned about their health and are more susceptible to really, suffering from COVID-19. So I think it's got to make a difference. I'm in a way surprised it hasn't made even more of a difference, because when you drill down and really look at the incompetent response that this government has had to this pandemic and the irresponsibility that it has shown in the way that it's approached it, I look at the 40% of people supporting, approving of Trump still, and wonder what they are thinking about. I've interviewed some of them, but this is, if there's ever been a question of whether good government, non-corrupt good government matters, the answer is taking a look at what we've been living through in this country in this pandemic. Yes, it matters, and it can be a matter of life and death.
I have some audience questions. Bruce, I know you have some from the chat room as well. Do you want to begin there?
Sure. So this question takes us more into the international realm. Jane, since the publication of your book about the rise of the radical right, we have seen an uprise of far-right leaders all over the world. How do you see the powers that promote the far-right candidates in the US influencing politics in developing countries like Brazil?
Well, it's interesting. About a year ago, I went down to Brazil, and Bolsonaro there is known as sort of mini Trump. He very much is modeling himself on Trump, and following very much the same playbook. And so, I mean, I really, when you look closely at some of these sort of anti-democratic movements around the world, it's fascinating to me. There is almost a playbook. They're doing so many of the same things. I think in Bolsonaro's case, one of the things that caught my eye the most was the way he's using social media very much as Trump is. Trump's obviously using Twitter, and Bolsonaro's using WhatsApp. That's what they seem to rely on in Brazil. And it's the same kind of disinformation and sort of inflammatory fights that are being picked. It's very much the same. So they seem to be encouraging each other.
We do have a question that I think is an interesting one. If you ran a newsroom, Jane, and you had 100 investigative reporters, what stories would you have them working on?
Oh God. I mean, I suppose when I stand back right now, among the things that we're going to really think mattered is probably the environment. It seems to be at a point that many other things can be fixed. It might not be fixable if we really mess this up. And, species may disappear and oceans may not be able to be returned. So I suppose that, that would be a priority subject. I mean, I guess I believe, though, really, that being a reporter, that the thing that works best is to try to play into the passions and interests of the specific reporters. I mean, people have different things that they really care most about and it's the kind of work that you've got to be really dedicated to. So you need to figure out what matters to the particular reporters. They're not all the same. And you know that because there were a lot of reporters in the room. For me, though, okay, one other thing I'd like to say about investigative reporting and what I've tried to do with it, which is there are a lot of, I think that the first thing you have to think about at the end of you need to get readers. You need to somehow get people to read these complex stories that involve a lot of data often, and sometimes they can be deadly dull. And for instance, in the dark money was, in a way, a lot of it was about campaign finance, which can put anybody to sleep. And so what I think investigative reporters have to think about is not only what really matters that they're investigating, it should be something really important and to the public interest, I think, but how to tell it in a way that you're going to get people to care. And a lot of that, I think, involves storytelling and finding characters, real, other human beings. And so I would encourage people who are doing investigative reporting to think a lot about the craft of the storytelling, not just the, getting the goods on something. They got to make it readable. And obviously, Nellie Bly, if we would go back to our namesake here, she was a girl who knew how to get people to pay attention. She did things that people thought of as almost stunts, and but she you've got to. I studied when I was in college with John Hersey, who was a fantastic writer, and he just drilled into me and the rest of us in his class the importance of the craft of writing. Try to make it, and I'm not the best writer in the world, but I try really hard to make these books page turners and these stories about people and make them readable and compelling. So I would emphasize, it's something that investigative reporters don't think about a lot always, but I really think it's important.
I would add that as a museum, our interest is in storytelling also, and we've got to tell the story right and in a compelling way to keep our audience. So I very much appreciate that. But I have a question here also. Your insights as to why, regardless of the charges of egregious behavior, people continue to support Trump and his style of leadership.
So there are a few things, I mean, this is a subject that probably all of us have endlessly thought about. I'll say two very different things. One is in terms of coverage of Trump and why maybe it hasn't had more impact and convinced people. Part of the problem, if you look back at investigative reporting done by people from Nellie Bly on, usually when they uncover something that's outrageous, the government acts, and there's a sense of shaming the people in government. The people in government become ashamed. There are hearings, and then there's a process of reform. What we've seen since Trump's been president, and to some extent even before, is a Congress that's frozen. The process is frozen so that you can expose wrongdoing, and you're not seeing the reform take place. And since Trump's been president, you're not really seeing people who act ashamed when they're exposed. So the cycle that brings reform has been kind of stuck, and I think that sort of confuses the public. But why do they support Trump? What comes to my mind is when I was reporting on Mitch McConnell, I was down I was talking to people in Kentucky, and some of them were people in the coal mine areas, and they said to me, we know coal's not coming back. Everybody knows that who knows anything about coal. But when Trump says he's bringing it back, he at least is paying respect to us. And most people, so many other politicians, including the Democrats who would say, remember Hillary Clinton said, we're going to put coal out of business. They're not respecting, maybe not showing enough respect to the people who are on the outs. And I'm not saying that you have to agree with them, but I think the feeling humiliated is a very powerful emotion for people. And there are a lot of people in this country who feel humiliated. And we who are, in the media elites and places like the New Yorker have to make sure not to be dismissive. I'm not saying, again, that you have to, agree with people who are making stupid choices from our standpoint, but to understand them, I think you have to see that a lot of people feel very humiliated, and I think that Trump has played them. I don't think he's genuine in representing their interests, but he knows how to play to those interests.
Bruce, do you have another one, or do you want me to go?
Yeah, I can field another one here. This one is rather specific. Jane, there are various pieces of anti-corruption legislation working their way through Congress like the Crook Act. Do you think any of these will be passed, or do you think they'll have any effect?
Well, so I'm not even sure what the Crook Act is. I don't know if there's a way to reach back to that, but there is HR 1 was the first House bill of the last session, and it was filled with proposals for reform, reforming money, reforming various other parts of government that would fight corruption. I think, you know, the Disclose Act, for instance, came very close to passing. It came within one vote. I think it can happen. I don't see why. It's happened before in this country, as we know. There's been corruption, and there's cycles of corruption, and then there's reform. I don't see why it can't happen again. You know, it's going to take the public being really mad and electing people who will go in there and reform things. And you know, I think it's doable. I don't know why I remain optimistic and against all the odds, but I still am somehow.
Yeah, that is amazing.
Well, you know, I mean, it's what motivates, I think, a lot of reporters. I mean, my co-author, Doyle McManus, from the first book I wrote, said he thinks reporters are the last naives. And in a way, I think it's right. We keep thinking if we just show them how terrible things are, they'll fix it. And so, you know, the motivation is part of the reform process, really, to sort of shine the light on these things. And not only shine the light on what's wrong, but I have to say part of the reason is that in addition to covering people who are corrupt and you know, bad actors, in books like The Dark Side, which was about the torture program that the George Bush administration had, there were very heroic, there are and were very heroic people who I've reported on in almost every area who stand up and do the right thing. And they may be in the minority, but they do it. And and we've seen whistleblowers over and over again. And there are people who are out there acting in the public interest and are pretty selfless. And it's very inspiring, and it sort of gives me some hope.
Wow. Well, here's another question from another viewer. And this goes to the heart of why we honor investigative reporters, because you guys are heroes in bringing us the information we need. But this viewer writes, have you personally experienced any repercussions for exposing corruption?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, I feel, you know, I've had my reputation attacked by among others, by the Koch brothers, who hired a private detective firm to try to dig up dirt on me. And they came very close to trying to put a fake story in print, claiming that I was a plagiarist. But luckily, the people I was supposed to have plagiarized from, other reporters, stood up and said it was untrue and went on the record saying so. And they had my back, they stood up for me, and it killed the story, which was, you know, scary. I mean, if the story had gotten into print saying I was a plagiarist, it was a bullet from my head, going straight for my head, basically, because that's, you know, a crime of moral turpitude for a writer. But it didn't work, and maybe the lesson is, you know, the solidarity that the other reporters showed in standing up for me was something worth keeping in mind when you know someone who's being falsely accused of something. You've got to, even though it may not be any fun and not something you want to do, jump in and stand up and stand up for them. Because in this case, it saved my neck. So.
Have you found yourself in that position of having to stand up and defend others in your profession?
Yeah, I have. My dear friend, Jill Abramson, who went to high school with me, she was a year ahead of me at the Ethical Culture School. she was accused at some point of plagiarizing from footnotes in a book. And I spoke up to the New York Times. I was the only quoted person defending her in the New York Times, saying, you know, everybody makes mistakes, but I am positive in her case it was not on purpose. And I was also, I have to say, I stood up for her when the Times, she was the executive editor of the New York Times, and they fired her. And I think I was the only person in the story who's quoted on the front page of the paper defending her. So I think it's important, you know, and it's part of, you know, it's not unlike being a reporter. You just got to tell the truth, and sometimes it's not fun. So, but mostly it is fun.
Bruce?
Yeah, here is another question from one of your books. You wrote that in August of 2015, Trump's rivals flocked to meet the Koch donors, and Trump tweeted, "I wish good luck to all Republican candidates that travel to California to beg for money from the Koch brothers. Puppets? ? Unquote." So the question is, what is Trump's relationship with the Koch empire today?
Well, so good question. And what's been interesting to watch is that even though Trump and the Kochs were not friendly during the 2016 campaign, they've become quite close. I mean, I'm using the Kochs to, there's only one Koch brother of the two that's still alive, but I'm using that to sort of as denote their entire machine, their political machine. It's very close with the Trump administration. And in fact, many of the people that have worked for the Kochs and been supported by the Kochs have high-placed positions in the Trump administration, including the vice president. Mike Pence was one of the favorite candidates always of the Kochs, and they gave him tons of money and kind of groomed him for high office. So the Koch people, various Koch people are sort of distributed throughout the Trump administration, particularly in the areas that Koch Industries cares most about, which has to do with energy policy and environmental policy.
So they've been very effective over the last several years.
I think quite effective. The head of Americans for Prosperity, which is their main political group, said about a year ago that he felt that, I think the quote was that there's almost no distance between us and the Trump administration. So, I mean, there are issues they disagree on, but they've gotten a lot of what they wanted. The tax bill that Trump passed that lowered tax rates on the super rich and on corporations was something that the Kochs could only dream about until Trump was president. A dream come true for them.
Bruce, you want to do the last question?
Sure, one more. How about this question? Would dispersed power enabled by proportional representation mitigate the potential to corrupt and determine the outcomes of elections and issues?
So you mean getting rid of the electoral college? Is that what?
Right, I think that's what he means, yeah.
I mean, it would certainly make it more possible that the population was represented in a more sort of proportional way. It would change the power balance, obviously, to the big cities and take it away from the sparsely populated areas in the country. I mean, it would, corruption, hard to know. There's corruption in the cities. There's corruption in the country, in the rural side. Corruption is the very first question was about morality versus and politics. Corruption is a human problem, not necessarily just a Republican problem or a Democratic problem. And it's a scourge to democracy, and I think it's worth rooting out, because So to end on that note, I'm really looking forward to coming to this museum someday when we can all travel again. And I've always been a Thomas Nast cartoon fan, and Boss Tweed is sort of the original corrupt ball from New York itself. So I hope you have some Nast cartoons, and I hope that I get up there at some point.
Jane Mayer, what a great pleasure. Thank you so much for spending time with us. It's a great honor to speak to you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Jane, thank you very much. One final question. Would that happen to be a Nellie Bly trophy behind you?
It is. Can you see it? I don't know if you can.
One of the very rare trophies that exist.
Hold on, I'm bringing it over. Hold on one second.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I thought the file cabinet was the stand. No?
Yeah,
okay.
It's a good place for it.
Can you see it?
That's great.
That's
that's beautiful.
Yes, it's transparent. We believe in transparency.
Hold on one second.
No, that's perfect.
I don't know.
It's very nice.
Anyway, well, okay. Thank you all so much. And I can't believe you got my forebears into that documentary. That was wild and incredibly nice.
For us, we can do it again sometime.
Thank you so much.
Joe Donahue, Jane Mayer, I want to thank you both very much. Let's give you a tremendous applause, virtual or otherwise, for our Nellie Bly Award winner. And this concludes our special evening. Thanks to all of you for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.